We are here at the Everett Station where the Everett Planning Commission is getting ready to meet on the Central Waterfront Plan. The Waterfront Plan is a document that will guide future development on about 93 acres along the Everett waterfront. This community conversation began just about 8 months ago, shortly after Kimberly-Clark announced its closure. Let's go upstairs and listen in. Welcome. I would like to open the City of Everett Planning Commission public meeting of tonight, Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012. Approval of the minutes from our meeting on September 18th, 2012. If there are any corrections or additions, please bring them forward now. Preferred alternative, which is regionally known as the Kimberly-Clark Mill site.
Wanted to run through a little bit of background information and talk a little bit about the preferred alternative. I want to, just for the public to recall some of the discussions and meetings that we've held on the subject going back to February when the City Council adopted the ordinance establishing the moratorium on development of the property and directing us to conduct this planning process. We had a public meeting and open house in April, and we've had 4 Planning Commission workshops and hearings prior to tonight's public hearing, which has been advertised as a potential decision meeting. In the ordinance that established the planning process, the City Council directed us to consider quite a few things, and this is probably the highlight of all of those items, and not everything in that ordinance is listed on the screen there, but I think that we have attempted to address all of these issues in the planning process. We have hired consultants to take a look at the economics of the potential uses that might be interested in locating on the waterfront. We've looked at public access. We've had discussions with the port and the Navy about impacts to their operations. We've had some discussion of environmental cleanup. And while I want to pause for just a moment when we talk about the cleanup, to let you know that the Department of Ecology manages cleanups in the state of Washington, and the Kimberly-Clark Company and Ecology have come to an agreement on conducting the cleanup of this property. For purposes of our planning process, however, we are assuming that the property will be cleaned up. The entire site will be reusable. There was a briefing at City Council a couple of weeks ago where Ecology and Kimberly-Clark said that they would expect to clean it up to either industrial standards or to unrestricted standards, depending upon what they find when they get into the soil and a little bit more information and data. And so those are some of the considerations, and we believe we've addressed all of them in our planning process. We did have a public questionnaire, and at our April 3rd public meeting, we encouraged the public to tell us what their priorities are for the planning process and for the property. And no surprise, I think most of the issues that the priorities that came back from the public process, certainly a lot of support for keeping that property in productive economic use, especially with family wage jobs. Public access was also a very high priority for the public, and as was environmental cleanup, and maximizing the economic benefits from redevelopment of this property, not only for the future users of that property, but for the surrounding community. So those are some of the priorities we heard through the public feedback process. We also had Greg Easton of Property Counselors do an analysis of what the economically viable uses are that would be attracted to the waterfront property. And he said, no surprise here, that the mill site is suitable for water-dependent industry. However, some of the priorities that we've been talking about, for example, high employment density and economic benefits for the downtown, in his analysis, some water-dependent uses don't provide quite the same job densities as perhaps some other alternatives that we looked at in the planning process, such as Business Park, because they just don't have the same job density. And while most of the water-dependent industries do provide family wage jobs, in his analysis, Business Park uses probably have a slightly higher average wage in that environment than water-dependent uses. And those higher job densities tend to have greater benefits to surrounding areas. So, but with that, that's kind of a real high-level summary of the economic analysis. There's a lot more detail that's available on our website and that you've heard presented from Mr. Easton. We did develop 4 alternatives for Planning Commission consideration and public comment. And at the last meeting we had on September 18th, we had a good discussion about those different alternatives, and Planning Commission gave us good feedback about what a preferred alternative should be. But of those 4 alternatives, the number 1 up there, existing regulations, was really the no action alternative, or just keeping things as currently they exist in our regulations and plans and policies. The second alternative was to limit use of the property only to water-dependent uses. So a lot of the uses that are currently allowed under the M2 zoning would have been prohibited under that alternative. The third alternative was a business park, different character of development than water-dependent industry, which would have emphasized public access on the property. And then the fourth was a mix of water-dependent and non-water-dependent industrial uses. We also looked at our existing plan policies and identified those that would influence our decision-making process here. And the city does have a policy about preserving industrial land and discouraging a conversion of that to non-industrial use, for primarily to maintain that for job and economic development in the community. Our Shoreline Master Program designates the waterfront property as urban deep water port, and public access is not required on-site for water-dependent industry under the current Shoreline Master Program designation, but if a non-water dependent use is to be established, then public access on-site would be required. Policies also call for minimizing the impacts of industrial uses on abutting areas, particularly residential areas. We communicated with the Port of Everett, and they've drafted, or they submitted correspondence during the planning process. They are definitely concerned about the security of their deepwater marine terminal, and felt that public access is not compatible with their security interests. And so they also supported maintaining the existing heavy manufacturing zoning for purposes of continuing to support jobs in the community. And the port is also investigating acquisition of the property. I believe they're still in their due diligence process at this point. We also communicated, met on a few occasions with the Navy, and they had quite a few comments that they also put in writing for us. They would prefer that public access be located away from their common property line with Kimberly-Clark, but they also did say that if it were to be provided, that they establish some minimum setbacks that they would ask for as part of the planning process. There are certain activities that they did not want to see adjacent to the naval station, including things such as manufacturing or storage of explosives or flammable materials. A helipad is not something they wanted to see next door. And they identified those setbacks, which based upon where buildings are located in proximity to the common boundary with the Kimberly-Clark property, would be a minimum of at least 46 feet from the naval station boundaries. They also asked for the opportunity to review any future uses for compatibility with the Navy operations and security reasons. And they said that they would not want to see any recreational boating or kayaking type activities, active water use within the harbor. So those are the Navy's comments. And at the meeting last month, the direction that as we staff best understood that coming from the commission, You preferred an alternative that was closest to alternative 4, which allows for water-dependent industrial uses in the shoreline and non-water-dependent uses elsewhere on the site. That you prefer, well, let's see, public access would be encouraged when not in conflict with water-dependent industrial uses, but not required on-site. Off-site public access would be okay for water-dependent uses. You wanted to have higher quality development standards than the current M2 zoning otherwise would require. And you wanted to address some of the impacts from certain types of heavy manufacturing uses. Also, for the area along West Marine View Drive, the gateway designation was important to improve the edge along the west side of West Marine View Drive, and that the residential zoning for the properties located east of West Marine View Drive be maintained, as well as the B1 zoning on the southeast corner of 25th and Marine View, and that also to consider some view protection measures for the residential neighborhood. We also, this whole planning process, have communicated weekly, if not more frequently, with Kimberly-Clark. And as they have stated in previous testimony, they prefer to keep the existing regulations in place. But they did review staff draft of the preferred alternative. That's one reason why we got it out a little bit later than we had expected to get it to the commission. But it was, I think, time well spent. We were able to come to some agreements, I think, in the draft alternative with some of the standards and uses that are listed in the preferred alternative. I think that most of the changes that we made or that Kimberly-Clark had suggested during that process, we were able to incorporate or address, if not actually accept them. We explained to them reasons why we couldn't. And so Kimberly-Clark focused their attention on the mill site. They really haven't spent enough time as of the publication date of this draft to give us comments about the narrow strips of land located between the railroad and West Marine View Drive, or on the properties located east of West Marine View Drive. So you may hear more about that from their representatives tonight. So the preferred alternative, in our understanding of the direction we got from the Commission last month, again informed a little bit further by additional Kimberly-Clark input, is consistent with our existing comprehensive plan. No policy changes would be required in order to implement the preferred alternative. It does not require any amendments to the Shoreline Master Program. It would leave the M2 zoning in place. However, it would amend the standards of the current M2 zoning, and we'll cover some of those in a little bit more detail. Section 1 of the Central Waterfront Plan is the plan vision and background information, and Section 2 contains the proposed land use regulations. This is a graphic that looks identical, because it is, to the to alternative 4 that you reviewed in terms of how it presents itself visually. Some of the policies would be a little bit different, but the again would be to encourage water-dependent uses in the shoreline area. Non-water-dependent industrial uses would be allowed elsewhere on the site, and on-site public access is encouraged when not in conflict with water-dependent industrial uses. And so for the proposed regulations, there are certain uses that are specifically prohibited. This is a partial listing of those uses, and I won't read all of those, but you'll see some of those that people have expressed some concerns about, including the Navy. The second to the last bullet there, warehouses. One of the reasons we recommended that warehouses not be a principal use was to try to maintain the ability for higher employment densities than a standard warehouse distribution kind of center would otherwise generate. We also, again, would require public access for non-water dependent uses in the shoreline area, and that is no change from current policies. We recommend reducing the overall permitted height on the property from 80 feet to 50 feet. However, we would allow an exception if an industrial manufacturing process required a taller building to operate, to conduct the purpose of that operation. Then it could go up to 80 feet for that portion of the building. We have recommended establishment of some view corridors in the east-west direction, basically by extending the street alignments between 21st Street and Everett Avenue through the mill property, and buildings within those alignments would be subject to a lower height, permitted height than on the rest of the site. There are some building and site design standards, limits on outdoor storage, and some regulations to ensure compatibility with the naval station. The recommendation is consistent with state law under Growth Management and Shoreline Management Act, consistent with the city comp plan policies and shoreline master program, and provides for the best long-term interests of the community. The action recommends, first of all, to the City Council that they adopt the sub-area plan, amend our land use regulations for all of the properties involved, and consider future amendments to the shoreline public access plan based upon some of the concepts in the plan, and as opportunities present themselves either through shoreline permits or other capital facility efforts, and to consider amendments to our utility and capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan as necessary to provide infrastructure to serve redevelopment on the property. So with that, I believe this is the end of our slideshow, and I am happy to address any questions.
So we've just heard an overview of the Central Waterfront planning process. We'll go back in just a moment and hear from the community and the planning commissioners.